The first scream split the rain-soaked night just as the iron cage groaned open. Marrow's Edge had never been a desert town. It clung stubbornly to the northern highlands, wrapped in black pines and perpetual fog, where rain slicked the wooden streets until they gleamed like oil and the river ran cold as iron. Coal smoke hung low, mixing with the scent of wet timber and fear, especially fear of the man they kept locked in iron. The cage sat on a flatbed wagon beside the courthouse, its bars thick, rust-dark, and bolted so tightly even bears had once failed to pry them loose. Lantern light flickered across it, throwing warped shadows that seemed to move on their own. Children were dragged past without being allowed to look. Women whispered prayers under their breath. Men pretended bravery with clenched jaws and loud laughter. Inside the cage sat Jonah Crowe. No one in Marrow's Edge could agree on who he truly was. Some said he'd been a river brute, a logger who cracked skulls for coin. Others swore he'd survived a hanging farther north, the rope snapping like rotten twine. The worst stories claimed he killed without weapons, using hands hardened like stone. No one remembered when fear had turned into certainty, only that by the time it did, Jonah Crowe was already behind bars. Rain hammered down as Sheriff Calder stepped up to the cage with a lantern and a ring of keys. His face was tight, jaw working as though he were chewing words he couldn't swallow. He had fed Jonah every night since the arrest, though he never looked him in the eyes. "You move," the sheriff muttered. Unlocking the small hatch, "I shoot." Jonah shifted slowly, chains clinking faintly around his wrists. He lifted his hands, palms open. Gray eyes steady beneath, rain-dark hair. Then the scream came from inside the courthouse. It was sharp, human, terrified. The sheriff froze. The lantern slipped from his hand, crashing into mud. The cage door was still locked. Jonah was still inside. Another scream followed, cut short by morning. Sheriff Calder lay dead behind his own desk, throat opened with surgical precision. No forced entry. No struggle. The cell keys hung untouched on their hook. And Jonah Crowe was exactly where he had been all night. By noon, the black carriage rolled into town. It moved slowly, wheels cutting deep into the wet street, pulled by two glossy horses draped in mourning cloth. Conversations died as it passed. Men removed their hats without knowing why. Women straightened instinctively. Something about the carriage spoke of money. Yes, but also of purpose. The door opened. Eliza Whitcombe stepped down into the mud without hesitation. She was 30 years old, dressed head to toe in black wool tailored cleanly to her tall frame. A veil shadowed her face, but nothing could soften the sharp intelligence in her eyes. Rain beaded on her gloves as if she barely noticed the cold. She had been gone from Marrow's Edge for 12 years, long enough to become a legend of her own, widow, heiress, owner of the Whitcombe Mill, the river docks, and half the rail spur under construction through the valley. Her husband, Thomas Whitcombe, had died 1 year earlier in a mill collapse upriver. The official report called it an accident. Eliza had never believed it. She stood still for a moment, letting the town take her in, letting them remember the trapper's daughter who had once run barefoot along the riverbank. Then she lifted her skirts slightly and walked straight toward the courthouse. Inside, the air smelled of blood and damp paper. Eliza surveyed the scene without flinching: the overturned chair, the stiffened body, the crimson pooled beneath the desk. Her eyes lingered on the untouched keys. "Locked all night?" she asked quietly. The deputy nodded. "Aye, ma'am." "The cage never opened. And the prisoner?" she asked, still there. Eliza turned without another word and walked back into the rain. The cage loomed ahead, iron bars slick with water, looming like a confession no one wanted to make. Jonah Crowe sat cross-legged on the wooden floor, his broad shoulders hunched slightly, chains loose but present. His face was bruised from old violence, beard thick and untrimmed, hair hanging dark and wet around his eyes. Those eyes lifted as she approached, gray, alert, unafraid. The crowd gathered behind her, murmuring, "That's him, monster." He finally snapped. Eliza stopped inches. From the bars, "You didn't kill him," she said. Murmurs turned to laughter. Jonah didn't smile. "Why you so sure?" he asked, voice rough low. Like stone dragged through water. She studied him, not the scars, not the chains, but the way he held himself, still, controlled. A man who knew exactly how much strength he possessed. "Because if you had," Eliza replied, "there would have been no body left to find." Something flickered across his face. Surprise, perhaps. Or recognition. That afternoon, the town hall overflowed. Voices rose. Fists slammed tables. Fear masqueraded as righteousness. "He's dangerous. He killed Calder. He belongs on the ground." Eliza stood at the front, gloved hands folded, posture calm as stone. "I am taking custody of Jonah Crowe," she said clearly. The room erupted. "You can't." The law, Eliza cut in sharply, "answers to contracts. And every contract in this valley answers to me." She laid documents on the table, ownership papers. Legal authority transferred through state channels no one in Marrow's Edge had ever challenged before. Without her mills, men would lose work. Without her docks, trade would die. Without her rail agreement, the town would rot into obscurity. They knew it. By nightfall, the decision was made. Jonah Crowe would be transferred to the Whitcombe estate on the edge of the forest, still a prisoner, still caged. The wagon rolled out under a curtain of mist, torchlight bobbing as armed men followed. Eliza rode inside a separate carriage, silent, hands clenched in her lap. She told herself this was strategy, that she needed the truth, that Jonah Crowe was a tool. Yet when the wagon hit a rut and the cage jolted, she felt it in her chest. The Whitcombe estate rose from the trees like a fortress stone foundation, towering timber walls, windows dark and watchful. The river curved nearby, its surface hidden beneath fog. Workers unloaded the cage into the carriage house, bolting it to the floor as ordered. When the others left, Eliza remained. Jonah watched her through the bars. "So," he said softly, "this is where monsters go now." She met his gaze without blinking. "This is where secrets come to die," she replied, "unless they start talking." For the first time, Jonah Crowe smiled, and it wasn't cruel. It was curious. And in that moment, standing alone in the rain-drenched carriage house with the most feared man in Marrow's Edge, Eliza Whitcombe understood something she hadn't expected at all. She had not brought danger home. She had brought the truth. The Whitcombe estate did not sleep the way other houses did. It listened. Fog rolled low between the pines, thick enough to swallow the moon, and the river murmured endlessly beyond the trees as if rehearsing secrets it refused to give up. Lanterns burned along the carriage house walls, their light glinting off iron bars newly bolted into stone. Jonah Crowe sat inside the cage, legs stretched out, wrists free, but watched. The smell of oil and damp wood heavy in the air. Eliza Whitcombe stood several paces away, her cloak still on, rain-dark hair escaping its pins. Neither spoke at first. "You could have left me in town," Jonah said at last. "Let them hang me and be done with it." Eliza's gaze never left him. "That would have been easier. Then why didn't you?" She hesitated, and that hesitation surprised her more than the question. "Because Sheriff Calder was not a careless man," she said finally, "and he was not brave enough to unlock a cage like yours alone at night." Jonah's jaw tightened. "You think he let someone in?" "I think he trusted someone," Eliza replied, "and that trust killed him." A wind rattled the carriage house doors. Jonah shifted, chains whispering against the floor. "You planning to keep me locked up here while you hunt ghosts?" "No," Eliza said. "I'm planning to watch who comes looking for you." That night, someone did dot just past midnight. Hooves approached slow and cautious along the tree line. Eliza stood at an upstairs window when she saw the lantern bobbing through fog. She did not wake the servants. She took a pistol from her desk and went down alone. Deputy Hawley stopped short when he saw her at the door. "Ma'am," he said, removing his hat, eyes flicking nervously toward the carriage house. "Didn't expect." "I know why you're here," Eliza said calmly. Hawley swallowed. "Town's uneasy. Folks say bringing him here's asking for trouble." "Trouble already arrived," she replied. "It arrived the night Sheriff Calder died." Hawley flinched at the name. "He was a good man." "So was my husband," Eliza said quietly. "Until he started asking the wrong questions." Hawley stiffened. "Thomas Whitcombe's death was ruled an accident." "Yes," Eliza said, stepping closer. "By Sheriff Calder." Silence stretched. Hale's knuckles whitened around his hat. "I just came to make sure." "You were safe," he muttered. Eliza smiled faintly. "Then you've done your duty. Good night, Deputy." Hawley mounted and rode off without another word. Fog swallowing him whole. Inside the carriage house, Jonah had been listening. "He's afraid," Jonah said when she returned. "Not of me." "No," Eliza agreed. "Of what I might uncover." She brought Jonah food herself, hot stew, fresh bread. He watched her hands as she passed it through the bars. "You trust me a great deal for a man you barely know," he said. "I don't trust you," Eliza replied. "I trust patterns." He huffed softly. "Then you'll want to hear this." He told her about the Millop River, about Thomas Whitcombe's visits weeks before his death, about men loading timber at night, falsifying ledgers, moving money through shell contracts, about an argument that ended with Thomas saying, loud enough for Jonah to hear, that he would take it to the authorities. "The sheriff?" Eliza asked. Jonah nodded. "Calder told him to let it go." Eliza's chest tightened. She remembered. That night, Thomas coming home late, boots muddy, eyes burning with anger. She remembered dismissing it as stress. Guilt tasted bitter. The next days brought tension to Marrow's edge. Workers refused to come near the estate. Supplies arrived late. Someone smashed the lamps along the river road. Eliza responded by reopening. The mill herself, standing at the gates in morning black, daring anyone to defy her. They didn't, but they watched. On the fourth night, the fire came. Jonah smelled smoke before the bells rang. He rose, gripping the bars as orange light flickered across the walls. Flames crawled up the carriage house door, licking hungrily at dry timber. "Eliza!" He roared. She was already running. Heat blasted her face as she shoved the door open, smoke burning her lungs. Jonah kicked at the bars, rattling the cage hard enough to shake dust from the beams. "They're trying to kill you," he shouted. "They're trying to silence you," she coughed back. She ran to the lock, hands shaking as sparks fell around her. For one frozen second, she saw Thomas's face in the firelight, remembered how helpless she had been then. Not again. The lock snapped open. Jonah burst free just as a beam collapsed. He grabbed a bucket, then another, working with brutal efficiency, smashing flames, hauling water until dawn broke pale and smoky over blackened wood. By morning, the carriage house still stood. So did Jonah Crowe. The message, however, had been delivered. That afternoon, Eliza summoned the town elders. "You tried to burn my property," she said evenly, "and my prisoner." No one spoke. "So we are done pretending," Eliza continued. "Whoever killed Sheriff Calder murdered my husband first." Murmurs rippled through the room. Jonah stood at her side now. No cage, no chains, just a long coat and a presence that made men uneasy. "You keep him free?" Someone spat. I keep him close, Eliza answered. There is a difference. That night, Eliza made her decision. She did not announce it. She did not soften it. She married Jonah Crowe by lamplight in her study, with a traveling magistrate who asked no questions and 2 witnesses who avoided Jonah's eyes. There was no ring for him, only a signature and a promise spoken low. I won't betray this, Jonah said simply. Eliza believed him. By morning, Marrow's Edge awoke to scandal. A grieving rich lady had married the caged man everyone feared, and in doing so, she had placed herself squarely in the path of whatever darkness had already claimed 2 lives. The morning after the marriage, Marrow's Edge felt like a held breath that refused to release. Fog rolled thicker than usual, clinging to rooftops and curling around the mill like a living thing. Word traveled faster than the river. Eliza Whitcombe had married Jonah Crowe. By the time the church bells rang for sunrise, the town had already decided it was either madness or war. Jonah felt it the moment he stepped into the street. Beside her, eyes followed him. Doors closed. Conversations died mid-sentence. Men who once shouted his name with hate now watched in silence, unsure whether fear or calculation should guide them. Eliza walked calmly, chin lifted, gloved hand resting lightly at Jonah's arm. She had expected hostility. What unsettled her was the restraint. The town was waiting. At the mill, production slowed to a crawl. Logs lay half-processed, saws idle. A foreman approached Eliza with his hat clutched tight. Some men won't work, he said. Say they won't answer to him. Jonah stiffened, but Eliza answered first. They don't answer to him, she said. They answer to me. The foreman hesitated. There's talk of a boycott. Then let them talk, Eliza replied. Anyone who leaves forfeits their wages and their contracts. That afternoon, 2 barges failed to arrive. By evening, a ledger vanished from Eliza's office. She knew then that the fight had moved beyond whispers. That night, Jonah rode out alone. Eliza stood at the window watching him disappear into fog, fear pressing against her ribs. She had not asked him to do this. He had simply kissed her hand and said, They won't move while you're watching, but they'll move when they think they're unseen. He followed the river north, past the mill where Thomas had died, toward the half-built rail spur. Lanterns glimmered ahead, men working when they shouldn't have been. Jonah dismounted and moved on foot, silent as shadow. He recognized faces from the old days: loggers, freight handlers, men who had once joked with Thomas over whiskey. He heard names spoken low, numbers exchanged, routes planned. Calder kept it quiet, one man said. Till he didn't. Another spat. Should have killed Whitcombe sooner. Jonah's fists clenched. He waited until they left, then slipped inside the rail office. The safe was hidden poorly behind a false wall Jonah had helped build years ago. Inside, he found ledgers wrapped in oilcloth, stamped with Thomas Whitcombe's personal mark. Proof. He rode hard back to the estate before dawn, blood pounding in his ears. Eliza was waiting. They spread the ledgers across the dining table. Candlelight revealing columns of falsified shipments, bribes, and names that reached from Marrow's Edge to distant cities. Thomas's notes filled the margins: questions, warnings, names circled in red. They killed him for this, Eliza whispered, and called her. Jonah said grimly. Eliza closed her eyes. Grief hit fresh and sharp, but beneath it burned resolve. We take this to the authorities, she said. Jonah nodded. But they won't let us. They were right. By midday, Deputy Hawley arrived with a warrant. He looked older than he had days before, shoulders slumped, eyes haunted. I'm sorry, he said quietly. There's orders from the county. For what? Eliza asked. To seize the mill and detain Jonah Crowe for questioning regarding the sheriff's murder. Jonah stepped forward. You know I didn't kill him. Hale's jaw trembled. I know, he said. But knowing and proving are different things. Eliza's voice hardened. Who issued the warrant? Holly hesitated. Men you shouldn't be tangling with. Eliza took the papers, read them once, then tore them cleanly in half. You can leave, she said. Or you can stay and decide who you really serve. Holly looked between them, anguish clear. At last he removed his badge and set it on the table. I can't arrest an innocent man, he said hoarsely. And I won't help murderers hide behind the law. That night, the ambush came. Jonah was riding back from the mill when shots cracked through the fog. His horse screamed and went down. Jonah hit the ground hard, pain exploding through his ribs. Men closed in, boots crunching gravel, rifles trained on him. Should have stayed caged. One sneered. Jonah fought like a cornered animal, fists, elbows, raw will. He took a bullet through the shoulder, felt bones scream, but kept moving. He broke one man's jaw, drove another into the river. Vanished into the trees bleeding and furious. He staggered into the estate near dawn. Eliza found him collapsed at the steps. She dragged him inside. Hands shaking, blood soaking her sleeves. She cleaned the wound with steady focus, though tears blurred her vision. I didn't expect this, she whispered. Jonah winced but smiled faintly. You didn't expect to live this long. She laughed once, broken. I expected to be a widow forever. Silence stretched between them, heavy with things unsaid. They killed Thomas, Jonah said gently. But they won't take you. Eliza looked at him then, not as a symbol, not as a weapon, but as the man who had chosen to stand with her when running would have been easier. We finish this, she said. Together. By morning, Deputy Holly had ridden out with copies of the ledgers hidden beneath his coat. 2 days later, federal marshals arrived. The arrests were swift and brutal. Men who had once ruled Marrow's Edge were dragged into the street in chains. Names were called. Ledgers were read aloud. The truth, long buried, clawed its way into daylight. The town watched in stunned silence. Jonah Crowe stood beside Eliza as the final man was taken away, the one who had ordered the fire. The ambush, the silence. The fog lifted. And for the first time since Thomas Whitcombe's death, Eliza felt the weight on her chest begin to ease. But freedom, she knew, would demand its final price. The rain stopped the morning, Jonah. Crowe woke without chains. Sunlight filtered through the tall pines surrounding the Whitcombe estate, catching on dew and turning the forest gold. It felt unnatural at first, as though the land itself were unsure whether peace had truly arrived. Marrow's Edge had lived under fog and fear for so long that clarity felt like a stranger. Eliza stood at the window of her study, watching smoke rise from the mill in a steady, honest line. Work had resumed, not under threat, not in secret, but in daylight. The river ran clean. No lanterns flickered at odd hours. No wagon slipped through the trees at night. Behind her, Jonah shifted carefully as he rose from the chair. His shoulder was still bound, the wound stiff, but healing. Freedom had not erased the marks left on him. It had only given him space to breathe with them. They'll be gone by noon, he said quietly. Eliza nodded. The marshals? And the men they took, Jonah replied. Once they clear the valley, there won't be anyone left who can pretend this never happened. Eliza closed her eyes briefly. Images rose unbidden. Thomas at the dinner table, sleeves rolled, talking about expansion. Thomas riding upriver, convinced the law would protect him. Thomas lying cold beneath a mill beam that had not fallen by accident. They murdered him, she said softly. And I spent a year believing grief was my punishment for loving him. Jonah moved closer but did not touch her. You loved an honest man in a dishonest place. She turned then, searching his face. And you? I survived, he said. That's all I ever expected. The town gathered that afternoon. Not out of obligation, but uncertainty. People stood in loose clusters along the square, watching as federal marshals loaded wagons with seized goods and paperwork. Some faces were ashamed. Others were angry. A few looked relieved. Deputy Hawley stood near the courthouse steps, his old badge returned to his pocket, his posture straighter than Eliza had ever seen it. "They want you to speak," he told her quietly. Eliza hesitated. She had never enjoyed being watched. Power to her had always been something wielded from behind doors and signatures. But this town had watched her fall in love, marry scandal, and drag its secrets into the open. She stepped forward. "My husband, Thomas Whitcombe, believed this town could be better," she said, her voice carrying easily. "For that belief, he was killed. Sheriff Calder was killed for trying to keep the truth buried." Murmurs rippled. "I did not marry Jonah Crowe to provoke you," Eliza continued. "I married him because I refused to let another innocent man die to protect lies." She paused, letting her gaze sweep across familiar faces. "This town can choose now," she said. "You can return to fear. Or you can build something honest." Silence followed. Then a mill worker stepped forward and removed his cap. Another followed. And another. No cheers, no speeches. Just a quiet acceptance that something had shifted beyond repair or restoration. That evening, Jonah walked alone to the river bend where fog once gathered thickest. The water ran clear now, reflecting the sky like polished glass. He knelt, touching the surface with calloused fingers. Eliza joined him moments later. "They cleared your name," she said. "Formally." "The papers came." Jonah nodded, unsurprised. "I figured they would." "You're free," she said. "Truly free." He stood, turning toward her. "And you?" She swallowed. "I don't know who I am without the fight." Jonah studied her carefully. "You're a woman who lost her husband and refused to lose herself with him." Tears filled her eyes, unexpected and unstoppable. "I didn't think I was allowed to live after Thomas." "You weren't," Jonah said gently. "You decided to anyway." Weeks passed. Marrow's edge changed not dramatically, not overnight, but steadily. Contracts were rewritten. The mill adopted new oversight. The rail spur completed under federal watch. People spoke more cautiously, but also more honestly. Jonah found himself teaching younger workers how to handle timber without losing fingers. He laughed more than he ever remembered laughing before. The children who once feared him now followed him at a distance, curious rather than terrified. One afternoon, Eliza found him repairing a fence along the estate boundary. "You don't have to stay," she said. "You know that." He wiped sweat from his brow. "I know. People still whisper," she added, "about us." Jonah smiled. "Let them." She studied him, heart-thudding. "I married you for protection, I know. And I stayed married to you because—" Her voice faltered. "Because grief doesn't vanish," Jonah finished. "It makes room." That night, they stood together in the study where it had all begun. The ledgers were gone, replaced by new books filled with legitimate accounts. Eliza lit a single lamp and took Jonah's hands in hers. "I love Thomas," she said. "And part of me always will." Jonah squeezed her fingers. "I'd worry if you didn't. But I don't want to live in a grave," she continued. "And I don't want this marriage to be a shield anymore." He met her gaze steadily. "Then let it be a choice." They sealed it not with passion, but with quiet certainty. Months later, Marrow's Edge marked the anniversary of the mill reopening. No banners. No speeches. Just work completed, wages paid, and doors left unlocked. Eliza stood on the porch watching Jonah teach a boy how to split a log cleanly. The child laughed when the wood cracked perfectly in two. She felt something unfamiliar settle in her chest. Peace. When Jonah returned to her side, she took his arm without thinking. "This town once put you in a cage," she said, "and you married the man inside it," Jonah replied. They shared a smile. Not triumphant, but earned. Marrow's Edge would never forget what it had done, but it would remember what it had become. And in a place where fear once ruled, that was the most shocking ending of all.